Stolen valor, sneered the desk sergeant, jabbing a meaty finger toward the faded trident inked on her forearm. Around them, the precinct reeked of bleach and cheap, burnt coffee, while cold steel cuffs ground mercilessly into the old scar tissue on her wrists. She didn't argue, she just waited. The fiberglass dust always found a way into Cora's throat, no matter how tight she strapped the respirator. It was a Tuesday in late November, and the Bremerton boatyard was a miserable expanse of gray rain and wet asphalt. Cora sat on an overturned bucket, peeling off her nitrile gloves. Her hands were permanently stained with resin and engine grease, the knuckles swollen from a decade of things she didn't talk about. She just wanted a beer. Her left knee was emitting a dull, throbbing ache, a souvenir from a bad jump over the Zagros Mountains that acted up whenever the barometric pressure dropped. O'Malley's was 3 blocks away. It wasn't a good bar, but it was dark, and the floors were sticky enough to keep the tourists out. Cora pushed through the heavy wooden door, shaking the rain from her canvas jacket. The air inside hit her like a damp towel, smelling of stale fryer grease, spilled Rainier beer, and wet wool. She slid into a booth near the back, keeping her back to the wall. It was an old habit, one she couldn't break, even if she wanted to. "Usual?" muttered Dave the bartender, not looking up from a glass he was polishing. "Just a draft. Whatever's cold," Cora said, her voice raspy from the fiberglass dust. She took off her jacket, draping it over the vinyl booth. She was wearing a thermal Henley, the sleeves pushed up to her elbows because the bar's ancient radiator was currently working overtime, hissing steam into the corner. That was the mistake, the rolled-up sleeves. 3 stools down, a guy was holding court. He had the look. High and tight haircut that was starting to grow out, a tactical fleece jacket with a Velcro patch missing its unit insignia, and a voice that carried over the low hum of the jukebox. He was 3 IPAs deep, and talking about Fallujah to a couple of wide-eyed dock workers who didn't know any better. Cora took a sip of her beer. It tasted like dirty copper lines. She didn't care. She closed her eyes, letting the alcohol burn a slow path down her throat. "Hey!" The voice was close. Too close. Cora opened her eyes. The guy from the bar was standing over her booth. Up close, he smelled of sour breath and cheap body spray. He was staring at her left forearm. Specifically at the faded, slightly crooked tattoo of an eagle clutching a flintlock pistol, an anchor, and a trident. "Where'd you buy that, sweetheart?" he asked. His tone wasn't curious. It was a threat, wrapped in a thin layer of drunken bravado. Cora looked at him. She didn't feel anger, she just felt exhausted. "Tattoo parlor," she said flatly. "Usually how it works." He let out a sharp, ugly laugh. "Right, a tattoo parlor. You know what that ink means, right? Or did you just think it looked tough on Pinterest?" "I know what it means," Cora said. She picked up her glass. "Walk away, man. I'm tired." He didn't walk away. He leaned in, placing 2 heavy hands on her table. "My brother was in Coronado. He washed out during Hell Week, puked blood for 3 days. And here you are, some mechanic, parading around with a Budweiser on your arm. They don't let women pass the pipeline. You're a fraud." Cora stared at the condensation rolling down her glass. She noted the man's stance. Off balance, right shoulder favored. He was angry, and anger made men sloppy. "I said, walk away." Her voice dropped a register. It wasn't a request anymore. He lunged. It was a stupid, telegraphed move. He reached across the table to grab her wrist, intending to yank her arm up to expose the tattoo to the rest of the bar. Cora didn't think. Muscle memory, drilled into her over thousands of hours on the mats in Virginia Beach, took over. She didn't try to pull away. As his hand clamped over her wrist, she rotated her arm, trapping his thumb. In the same fluid motion, she slid out of the booth, stepping into his personal space. She brought her right elbow up, driving it hard into the soft tissue of his brachial plexus, right where his shoulder met his neck. The man let out a choked gasp, his legs giving out as the nerve strike short-circuited his motor functions. Cora didn't stop. She pivoted, maintaining control of his wrist, and swept his right leg. He went down hard, his collarbone slamming against the heavy iron base of a bar stool with a sickening wet crunch. The bar went dead silent. The jukebox abruptly transitioned to a scratchy country song. Cora stood over him. Her heart wasn't racing. Her breathing was perfectly even. She looked down at her knuckles. They weren't even red. She felt a brief, irritating flash of regret. "Now I have to find a new bar." The man on the floor was writhing, clutching his shoulder and screaming, "She broke my collarbone! The crazy bitch broke my bone!" Dave, the bartender, was already on the phone. 10 minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights of the Bremerton Police Department strobed through the rain-streaked windows. 2 officers came in. They saw a sobbing, injured veteran on the floor and a woman calmly finishing her beer in the booth. "She attacked me," the man wailed, pointing a trembling finger at Cora. "She's a fake. Look at her arm. Stolen valor." The older cop, a guy with a thick mustache and a nameplate that read Gaines, walked over to Cora. He looked at the man on the floor, then at her. He saw the trident. His jaw tightened. "Stand up and put your hands behind your back," Gaines ordered, unclipping his cuffs. "He grabbed me," Cora said, her voice mild. "I don't care if he called you a name. You don't snap a guy's collarbone. And I know damn well you didn't earn that ink," Gaines said, his voice dripping with disgust. "Hands. Now." Cora didn't fight it. She stood, turned around, and offered her wrists. The metal bit into her skin. It was cold. She let out a long, slow breath as they marched her out into the rain. The back of the squad car smelled like old vomit masked by a heavy pine air freshener. Cora sat against the hard plastic seat, watching the blurry streetlights of Bremerton smear across the wet window. The handcuffs were ratcheted 1 click too tight, restricting the blood flow to her fingers. She flexed them rhythmically, a tiny, repetitive movement to stay grounded. She wasn't panicking. Panic was a luxury she had unlearned a long time ago, but a deep, gnawing annoyance was beginning to settle in her gut. She had spent 3 years trying to disappear. She worked on boats. She paid her taxes in cash. She kept her head down, and now, a drunk idiot with a fragile ego was about to unravel it all. The precinct was a cinder-block box, buzzing with the chaotic energy of a Tuesday night shift. Telephones shrilled. A drunk in a holding cell was singing slightly off-key. Gaines marched her past the booking desk. "Got a live one here," Gaines told the desk sergeant. "Aggravated assault, and tack on impersonating military personnel. She's parading around with a seal trident on her arm." The desk sergeant, a tired-looking woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, peered over the counter. She looked at the tattoo. "Jesus, you people have no shame." They took her boots, her jacket, and the heavy leather belt she wore. They dumped her in interview room 3. It was a small, windowless box painted a sickly shade of institutional green. A single fluorescent tube flickered overhead, emitting a high-pitched hum that made the permanent ringing in Cora's left ear flare up. She sat in the metal chair, staring at a scuff mark on the linoleum floor. 2 hours passed. The air in the room grew stale, smelling of dust and her own damp clothing. The door opened. A detective walked in, carrying a manila folder and a lukewarm bottle of Diet Coke. He was young, wearing a suit that was a little too shiny, his tie loosened to show he was a hard worker. He dropped the folder on the metal table with a loud smack. "I'm Detective Reynolds," he said, pulling up a chair and leaning back. He took a sip of his soda, eyeing her. "Cora Davies. At least, that's what your Washington driver's license says." Cora said nothing. She looked at his Adam's apple, briefly calculating the pounds of pressure required to crush it, before dragging her eyes back to his face. "Miller, the guy you assaulted is getting a plate put in his shoulder right now," Reynolds said, flipping open the folder. "You shattered his clavicle. He's pressing charges." "He put his hands on me," Cora said. Her voice was scratchy. "I neutralized the threat." Reynolds laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. "Neutralized the threat. Listen to you. You've watched too many movies, lady." He leaned forward, tapping a pen against the table. "I ran your name, Cora Davies." Nothing comes up. No prior arrests, no military service record in the public database, just a blank slate that started paying taxes in this state 3 years ago. Cora shifted her weight. The metal chair squeaked. "So," Reynolds continued, "we have an aggravated assault, and we have the Stolen Valor Act of 2013. You're wearing a special warfare insignia. A federal offense if you use it to obtain money, property, or other tangible benefits." "I was drinking a beer," Cora said. "I didn't ask for a military discount." "It goes to character," Reynolds snapped. "It shows you're a liar, a fraud. We're going to run your prints through APHIS. We'll find out who you really are." He stood up, signaling for a patrol officer outside the door. They brought in an ink pad. Cora didn't resist. She let them press her fingers onto the cold glass scanner, then ink them on paper for good measure. The black ink was thick and sticky. "Sit tight, operator," Reynolds mocked as he left the room. The heavy metal door clicked shut. The lock engaged. Cora wiped the residual ink onto her jeans. She crossed her arms, put her head down on the cold metal table, and closed her eyes. She fell asleep in less than 3 minutes, a deep, dreamless sleep. An operator's sleep. She woke up to the sound of the door crashing open. She didn't startle. She simply raised her head, blinking against the harsh fluorescent light. Detective Reynolds was standing in the doorway. The smugness was completely gone from his face. He looked pale. Sweat was beading on his upper lip. He held a single sheet of paper in his hand, and it was visibly trembling. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. His voice cracked. Cora sat up, rolling her shoulders to pop a stiff joint. "I told you, Cora Davies. The system." Reynolds swallowed hard. "I ran your prints through the FBI database. It didn't give me a rap sheet, it locked my terminal. It threw up a Department of Defense override code. Red flag. Do not detain. Do not interrogate." Before Cora could answer, the atmosphere in the precinct shifted. It wasn't a sudden noise. It was the distinct sound of authority moving through a space that usually belonged to someone else. The heavy, rhythmic thud of polished leather boots on linoleum. The sudden, absolute silence of the cops in the bullpen outside. Reynolds stepped back from the doorway as if physically pushed by the changing air pressure. A man walked into the tiny interview room. He had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe. He was in his late 50s, wearing the immaculate service dress blue uniform of the United States Navy. The gold stripes on his sleeves, one thick, 3 regular, gleamed under the terrible lighting. He smelled of heavy starch, expensive shaving soap, and old money. Admiral Thomas Kincaid. Cora stared at him. For the first time all night, her heart gave a single, painful thump against her ribs. Kincaid didn't look at Reynolds. He didn't look at the 2 police captains who were hovering anxiously in the hallway behind him. He looked entirely at Cora. He took in her greasy hair, her stained thermal shirt, the dark circles under her eyes, and the ink on her fingers. Admiral, one of the police captains, stammered from the hall. "Sir, we had no idea. She was involved in a bar fight, and..." Well, the officer on the scene thought she was impersonating a military member. "The tattoo, sir." "Women aren't." Kincaid held up one hand. A single, sharp motion. The captain shut his mouth instantly. Kincaid stepped closer to the metal table. He looked down at Cora's left arm. He looked at the trident. The ink was a little blurry at the edges. The eagle's left wing was slightly thicker than the right, the result of a vibrating needle held by a shaky artist in a concrete bunker in Djibouti 8 years ago. Kincaid reached out. His large, calloused thumb lightly brushed the edge of the tattoo. He leaned down, his voice barely louder than the hum of the fluorescent light, carrying a weight that crushed the remaining air out of the room. "That tattoo's real." The fluorescent light flickered, a dying, rhythmic buzz that filled the sudden vacuum in the room. Detective Reynolds opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked from the Admiral's heavily ribboned chest down to the grease-stained woman slouching in the metal chair. "Admiral Kincaid, sir, with respect. The Department of Defense explicitly states there are no female SEALs. It's a matter of public record. She's..." "I don't give a damn about public records, Detective," Kincaid said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It had the heavy, crushing density of a collapsing bulkhead. "Take off her cuffs." Reynolds hesitated, his eyes darting to the 2 captains in the hallway. Neither man moved to support him. They were already mentally drafting their incident reports, trying to figure out how to scrub their names from this clusterfuck. "Now, son," Kincaid added, the softness in his tone infinitely more dangerous than a shout. Reynolds stepped forward, fumbling with his keys. His hands were shaking. The metal teeth of the handcuffs clicked open. Cora didn't rub her wrists. She simply brought her arms forward and rested her hands flat on the cold aluminum table. The skin around her radius bones was bruised a deep, angry purple. "Get out," Kincaid said to the room at large. "Clear the bullpen. Cut the recording equipment in this room. If I find out a single frame of audio or video from the last 10 minutes leaves this building, I will personally see to it that the federal government audits this precinct until you're all directing traffic at elementary schools." Reynolds practically sprinted for the door. The captains vanished. The heavy metal door slammed shut, the deadbolt engaging with a definitive thunk. Silence settled over the room, thick and suffocating. Kincaid didn't sit down. He stood near the door, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid. He smelled exactly as Cora remembered. A sterile mixture of starch, brass polish, and the faint, bitter scent of black coffee. "You look like hell, Cora," he finally said. Cora stared at her fingernails. They were packed with gray marine sealant. "You look older, Tom. Guess they finally stopped promoting you." A bar fight in Bremerton. Kincaid let out a slow, measured breath over a drunken idiot who washed out of BUD-S. "He grabbed my arm," Cora said. Her voice was flat, devoid of defense or justification. "My knee was hurting. The barometric pressure was dropping. I didn't feel like de-escalating." "You shattered his clavicle in 3 places. The ER doc said it looked like he got hit by a truck going 40. "I pulled the strike," Cora muttered. "If I hadn't, his collarbone would have severed his subclavian artery, and he'd have bled out on the sticky floor of O'Malley's before the paramedics got past the bouncer." Kincaid closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. It was the only crack in his armor. "I believe you." He pulled out the metal chair opposite her and sat. The chair groaned under his weight. Up close, the lines around his eyes were deeper than they had been 3 years ago. The weight of command was visibly eroding him. "They don't know," Cora said, nodding toward the door. "The cops. They really think I bought this ink at a parlor." "Of course they do," Kincaid said. "As far as the Navy, the Pentagon, and the United States Congress are concerned, you don't exist. Project Artemis was officially defunded and disbanded in committee. The 16 women who started that pipeline are recorded as having transferred to logistical support roles. The 3 who made it to the teams are officially listed as intelligence analysts attached to DevGru, and you—" Kincaid paused, looking at the faded scar running along her jawline. "You died in a helicopter crash during a training exercise off the coast of Somalia." "I liked that funeral," Cora said softly. "Very tasteful. I appreciate that you didn't do the closed casket, left it a mystery." "You were a ghost, Cora. A perfectly engineered, lethal ghost." Kincaid leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You could have stayed one. You had a new social security number, a clean passport, enough cash and a blind trust to buy an island. Why the hell are you scraping barnacles off tugboats in the freezing rain?" "Because boats make sense," Cora said. The hum of the lights was giving her a headache. An engine is broken, or it isn't. A hull is watertight, or it leaks. There's no gray area. There's no collateral damage. When I fix a boat, it doesn't wake up screaming in the middle of the night. Kincaid didn't flinch at the barb. He took it. He had ordered the strike in the Panjshir Valley. He had drawn the map. He knew exactly what she woke up screaming about. "You didn't fly from San Diego to Washington State in the middle of the night just to lecture me on my retirement choices," Cora said, her eyes narrowing. She studied his face, the subtle tension in his jaw, the way his right hand tapped rhythmically against his thigh, a tell he'd had since he was a lieutenant. "You weren't alerted by the arrest. You were already looking for me." Kincaid stopped tapping. "Your APHIS flag triggered an alert, yes, but I was already in Seattle. We had a team canvassing the marinas. We knew you liked the water." Cora felt a cold, sharp spike of adrenaline pierce the dull exhaustion in her chest. Her muscles tightened, preparing for a threat she couldn't yet see. "Why?" Kincaid reached inside his jacket. He pulled out a thick, unmarked manila envelope and dropped it on the table between them. It hit the aluminum with a heavy, wet smack. "Because of him," Kincaid said. Cora didn't touch the envelope. She stared at it as if it were a live grenade, a piece of unexploded ordnance resting on the table. The fluorescent light reflected off the brass clasp. "I'm out, Tom," she said. Her voice dropped an octave. The scratchy exhaustion was gone, replaced by the flat, dead tone she used to use over the radio just before breaching a compound. "I've been out for 3 years. I'm dead, remember?" "Open the file, Cora." "No." She pushed her chair back. The metal legs screeched against the linoleum. "I'm going back to my apartment. I'm going to take a hot shower, take 2 ibuprofen, and tomorrow I'm going to finish replacing the fuel injectors on a commercial trawler. You can take your file, your uniform, and your clearance, and you can shove it." She stood up. Her left knee gave a sharp, vicious throb, but she didn't limp. "It's Hayes," Kincaid said to her back. Cora froze. Her hand was inches from the doorknob. The air in her lungs suddenly felt thick, like breathing through wet sand. "Hayes is dead," she said to the steel door. "I watched the compound burn. I saw the drone feed. We called in the airstrike on his coordinates." "He survived the blast," Kincaid said, his voice stripped of all its commanding authority. "He just sounded tired. He crawled out of the rubble. The Haqqani network found him. They didn't kill him. They kept him. For 3 years." Cora slowly turned around. The metallic taste of old adrenaline flooded her mouth, bitter and familiar. "You're lying." "I wish to God I was." Kincaid tapped the manila envelope. "Asset Recovery in Peshawar raided a compound 2 weeks ago. They found a basement. There was writing on the walls, coordinates, call signs. The intricate, paranoid ramblings of a man who has been tortured to the edge of madness and back. And there was a fingerprint in dried blood on the wall." Kincaid swallowed hard. It matched Hayes. Cora walked back to the table. Her steps were slow, heavy. She reached out and flipped the brass clasp on the envelope. Her fingers, usually steady enough to thread a needle in pitch darkness, were trembling. She slid the contents out. There were no glossy satellite photos, no clean intelligence briefs, just a series of Polaroids taken in a dark, concrete room. The walls were covered in scratched, frantic handwriting. Cora leaned in. She recognized the cipher. It was the rudimentary shorthand she and Hayes used to use during Overwatch shifts to complain about the brass without the comms officers understanding. She looked at the last photo. It was a blurry, zoomed-in shot from a street camera in Karachi, taken 4 days ago. It showed a man walking through a crowded market. He was gaunt, his face obscured by a heavy beard and a filthy scarf. But his gait, the slight drag of the left foot, the way his shoulders hunched forward to protect his center mass, it was Hayes. "He's loose," Kincaid said softly. "He broke out, or they let him go. We don't know. What we do know is that he's moving, and he's moving with purpose. He's leaving a trail of bodies behind him, not just combatants, civilians. He's operating under the assumption that he's still behind enemy lines, and he's treating everyone as a hostile." Cora traced the blurry outline of the man in the photo. A profound, hollow ache opened up beneath her ribs. Hayes, the man who had carried her for 3 miles through a sandstorm with a bullet in his own thigh. The man she had abandoned because Kincaid had ordered the strike. "Send a team," Cora whispered. "Send DEVGRU. Bring him in." "We can't," Kincaid said. "He's too erratic. He's setting traps. He killed 2 CIA contractors who tried to approach him in Islamabad. He thinks we're all dead, Cora. He thinks the Navy betrayed him. If a uniformed element pushes him, he'll fight to the death. He'll take as many of them with him as he can, and then he'll blow himself up." Kincaid stood up. He walked around the table, standing close to her. "He only trusted one person on that team. He only ever listened to you." "I'm not a negotiator, Tom." Cora dropped the photo. She wiped her hands on her jeans, trying to scrub away the sudden cold sweat coating her palms. "I break things. I don't talk people off ledges." "You don't have to talk him off," Kincaid said, his eyes locking onto hers. "You just have to get close enough to put him down. Non-lethal if you can, lethal if you must." Cora looked up at him. She felt a sickening wave of revulsion, a profound disgust not just for the man standing in front of her, but for herself. Because deep down, beneath the layers of fiberglass dust and civilian apathy, a dark, awful part of her was waking up. The part of her that missed the weight of a rifle. The part of her that missed the brutal, binary clarity of violence. "You want me to hunt my own ghost?" she said. "I want you to bring your brother home," Kincaid corrected, "before I have to send a drone to do it." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked to the door. He knocked twice, hard. The deadbolt clicked, and the door swung open. The hallway was completely empty. The cops had vanished, ordered to make themselves scarce. "A car is waiting outside," Kincaid said, not looking back. "It will take you to Nas Whidbey Island. A transport is fueled and waiting on the tarmac. You have 20 minutes to decide if you're a mechanic or if you're a SEAL." He walked down the hall, his boots echoing sharply against the linoleum. Cora stood alone in the interrogation room. The fluorescent light continued its dying buzz. She looked down at the photos scattered on the table. She looked at her hands, permanently stained with the grease of a quiet, miserable life. She picked up the file. She walked out of the room, passing the booking desk. Detective Reynolds was sitting there, pretending to read a report. He didn't look up. He didn't breathe until she was past him. Cora pushed open the heavy glass doors of the precinct. The rain in Bremerton hadn't stopped. It was coming down harder now, a freezing, sideways deluge that soaked through her thermal shirt in seconds. She stood on the concrete steps. To her left was the road leading back to the boatyard, to her apartment, to the smell of old coffee and wet dog, to safety. To her right, A black SUV was idling by the curb. Its headlights cut through the driving rain, illuminating the falling drops like static on a television screen. The rear door was already open. Cora closed her eyes. She inhaled the scent of the ocean on the wind. It didn't smell like freedom anymore. It smelled like salt and copper and blood. She opened her eyes, tucked the manila folder under her arm to protect it from the rain, and walked toward the idling car. The heavy door closed behind her with the finality of a vault.